think creativity real creativity defies definition because there's so many different kinds. I think everyone has the ability to be creative. I think it's one of those things that's hardwired into us at birth and over the course of time beaten out of us by there's all these rules and regimens and codes that are kind of put in place to make us behave in a certain way and think in a certain way and act in a certain way, and that's the foundation on which society is built. You have to be able to function with a whole bunch of other people living in a space, and so at a certain point you're taught that cars aren't blue and ducks need to have one beak. But if you think about it, I think all of us at a certain point have the ability to be kind of wildly creative. But yeah, I guess counterintuitively, it's beaten out of us. So it lies dormant in all of us, and the ability to bring it out of yourself at a certain stage in your life it just kind of depends on the circumstances in which you find yourself. Creativity is innate, but it can be forgotten, and so it can be retaught. So creativity is innate, and it can be retaught. And the way you reteach it is by putting yourself in a situation where you are forced to be creative or think creatively. The world can offer you prompts, little ways of jarring some of these things loose. But yeah, I guess a lot of people, their default state is to be straight down the line, not very creative. But then you can find yourself in situations where you're kind of forced out of your comfort zone. I guess comfort zone is. It's interesting how most people perceive, myself included, comfort zone as being something that is fundamentally uncreative, because it's safe. And I guess there's something dangerous about creativity, because it's mercurial. Not everyone understands where it comes from, or how necessarily to define it. And I think we kind of, it's one of the questions that creative people often get asked is, where do you get your ideas from? There's a fundamental fear or distrust of, or lack of understanding of the creative process. And it scares some people. Not necessarily in a bad way, but just kind of more like a fascinated and scared, I guess. I mean, we all like a problem, and we all like a box. So it's almost like the tighter the box, the more challenges that are put in front of you, the more interesting it is to find your way out. The freedom of a tight brief is one of those expressions. There's actually the blah blah freedom of a tight brief. I can't remember specifically what the line is, but yeah, the more it's nice to wriggle your way out of a pair of handcuffs creatively. So if there's a good brief is one that forces you to find an interesting way out. The way that I typically approach most briefs is I like to get to know the client that I'm making work for, because I think individual taste plays a role in what they end up producing. Obviously, I don't think anyone's able to put a distance between themselves and what they think the right answer is. So, which is why I have a huge, I put enormous value. I find enormous value in tissue sessions, because it's kind of that first burst of creativity where you show a client a whole bunch of work and you kind of get a sense of what it is that they like or don't like. And when you can kind of gauge where their taste lies, the type of work that they gravitate towards, then you can tailor that work in the next round to be the right answer for them, if that makes sense. Well, in as much as it's always interesting to look at, I think if someone has gone to the trouble of mining a whole bunch of data and finding a whole bunch of things out, and you agree with that research and that data kind of stacks up against the brief that you've got, then it's helpful. Interestingly enough, there's times where a client may do a lot of research and a lot of data, and they may look at this all and the thing that they've kind of, this composite, this aggregate of all this thinking, and they go, okay, so we want to target these people based on this research. It'll be wrong. There'll be a disconnect. I think people, what is it? It's confirmation bias. Sometimes there's a bit of people will use data or research to back up a thing that they want rather than something that is necessarily true. And in that case, sometimes you need to go, hang on a second, this thing that you've just shown me doesn't necessarily lead to the place that you're talking about, or where you want to go, I think. And then you have to have another conversation and try and prove your point of view. And that this other thing that you think is right. And sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. How you know something is good is definitely down to gut, and your barometer strengthens over the course of time, and it only comes, well, it comes from experience and from doing things over and over again, but then it also comes from seeing lots of different things, which is why I always celebrate and express the importance of taking in a lot of other people's work from many, many other disciplines as a means of kind of widening your frame of reference. I think if all you do is, if you're interested in one thing, you only look at one type of creativity, or you stop being interested in where the world is going creatively, culturally, it's bound to lead to stale, irrelevant work. It's interesting. There's been a lot of conversation recently around age and where creatives go, and why do when you hit a certain, there's a ceiling. You hit a wall and creatives stop being relevant. You don't see a lot of older people in the industry, and I think the interesting thing is I think there's a natural drop off. I think everyone at a certain point, or most people, stop consuming. You see people kind of reach a certain point in their lives where they've gone, I've listened to enough music, so I'm not going to keep up with anything new, or these were my favorite movies and they will always be my favorite movies. And they get bogged down with other things like family or mortgage or whatever. The everyday pursuits become overwhelming, and so they stop feeding themselves creatively, and then they wonder why their thinking and their work stops being relevant. And to me, it's kind of obvious. You have to kind of stay fresh and stay current to be able to produce things that seem fresh and relevant and current. To selling work that you believe is good, I think you need an army of people alongside you, because passion only counts for so much. So I usually I bring the passion, and I try and express in words why I believe my gut is telling me this and why I think it's right, but invariably, most of the great work that we end up selling here is down to a team of people who rigorously back up everything that we do with facts and opinions from consumers and oh yeah, it's far beyond me how we sell things. And I don't really notice it. The creative process is the creative process. Come up with ideas, do things. Maybe I'm like a lobster in the sense that I'm not conscious of the fact that I'm being boiled alive, but it seems just as painful now as it did back then, just in different ways, I suppose. I think the biggest barriers to making creative work, or good creative work, are kind of the same as they've always been. It's kind of no one wants to do bad creative work. Everyone wants to do the right thing, but there is no dyed-in-the-wool, tried, tested, and true right answer. It's kind of like everything is still a bit of a punt. No one knows what the silver bullet's going to be. The frustrations will always be the frustrations. People not seeing the obvious answer, which you believe to be true. But then there's creating work in our industry has always been a process of give and take. There's been times that I've been wrong and times that I've been right, and there's something lovely and serendipitous, and it's not codified what we do. And sometimes you get it right, and sometimes you get it wrong, and you just have to keep trying and pray that what comes out the other end is going to be worth people's time. Kind of as simple as that. It's always going to be hard. It's always going to be frustrating, but relative to what? Compared to other jobs, it's probably a cakewalk. I just feel lucky to be able to do this for a living.